Despite the star-stacked fight card and the trio of championship bouts that made up the main card of UFC 259, one of the biggest talking points to emerge from the night itself was once again the commentary of both Joe Rogan and Daniel Cormier. Now, we've already made a pair of videos discussing the main event showdown, one focused on the performance of Jan Blachowicz and one centered around the future of Israel Adesanya, as well as a video on the bantamweight title showdown between Petr Yan and Aljamain Sterling. So if you haven't yet checked those videos out, I would urge you to do so as soon as you're finished with this piece. But for this video, I'm going to give my take on the UFC's current pay-per-view commentary team and why there has been so much criticism of their efforts in recent times. So let's get into it. I do know that Dominic Cruz can often find himself in the hot seat, but I think there's no doubt over the fact that Jon Anik, Joe Rogan and Daniel Cormier are the #1 trio of UFC commentators for events on US soil. And in recent times, to say that the commentary on UFC pay-per-views has been substandard would be a huge understatement. If you don't know what I'm talking about, well, there are a few things that are clearly irking some fans. The camaraderie that exists between Rogan and Cormier is great fun, of that there is no doubt. But as time has gone on, their habit of getting too caught up in their playful banter has started to seriously detract from the fights themselves. This shouldn't be a podcast or a chilled out post-fight companion piece. This is a highly tense, high-stakes environment where these fighters are giving every ounce of themselves in order to provide for those closest to them. And whether Rogan and DC are joking around during a pivotal moment of the fight, or going completely off topic while giggling uncontrollably, I found myself getting increasingly pissed off with the way the three-man commentary booth has been operating of late. Of course, there has also been calls of apparent bias, especially during the UFC 259 main event between Jan Blachowicz and Israel Adesanya, where Rogan and DC were very clearly no-selling a lot of Blachowicz's best work, instead heaping praise on Adesanya in exchanges that he was in some ways losing. But that has always been a feature of Rogan's commentary. His insistence on drawing out a narrative and sticking to his guns has been part of his approach for years now. Maybe he thinks a fighter is tired or hurt, or decides that we're seeing the very best version of fighter X we've ever encountered. His narratives end up causing him to focus so heavily on one fighter that he ends up almost ignoring the merits of what the other guy is doing. And look, sometimes that's just how commentary works. It's very difficult to keep your emotions in check in the middle of a fight. Rogan does it the way he does it, and for the most part it works for him. And overall, commentary isn't that important if you're truly paying attention to what's happening in front of you. But I think this has become such a big problem that I'd like to give my thoughts on what's going wrong. Because as much as the clear bias towards Adesanya, whether unintentional or not, messed with the overall viewing experience, I do think that the main issue for me personally is the three-man booth. If you're enjoying this video, be sure to leave a like before subscribing to the channel to keep the MMA dive train moving ahead. Cheers. Look, I love Jon Anik. He was certainly a slow burn initially, but honestly I think he's the best commentator the UFC could ever hope for. He's always sharp, articulate, and reads whatever promotional adverts he has to with a level of fluidity that blends into the entire show as much as can be done, given the circumstances. And in those moments where Rogan and Cormier are talking about the most random and unimportant rubbish, Anik will do what he can to steer the ship back on course. As the play-by-play commentator, he is a legit 10 out of 10 in my book, and in the three-man booth, he is most certainly not the problem. And overall, I don't think either Joe or DC is the root of the issue. Sure, they do contribute their fair share to making UFC commentary so unfocused of late, but I think there are a few factors that may be contributing. First of all, the recent absence of a crowd could well be making the environment too relaxed to give it that big fight feel. Rogan and DC don't need to raise their voices to beat out the sound of a crowd, and in a practically empty arena, it's likely going to be a lot easier for them to get overly comfortable. But I think above all other things, I really do believe that a two-man booth is far superior for a night's worth of fights. The classic pairing of Rogan and Mike Goldberg worked so well in my opinion because the roles were clearly established, and as the play-by-play announcer, Goldberg knew exactly what he needed to do to move things along and add color where necessary. In a three-man booth where Anik's role doesn't change too much, with two colorful, technically astute commentators, the fact that they are pretty much taking turns speaking kills the commentary's momentum in crucial moments. Say for example, if Jon Anik and Joe Rogan were both heading the booth for the Blachowicz-Adesanya fight, Anik would still do what he does, but because of the fact that there was no third man, Rogan would be fully responsible for setting up what's happening. He would have the entire weight of the role to himself, and because of the fact that there would be no turn taking to give both color commentators their moment on the mic, what we would get would be a smoother listening experience, free of the urgency of that pressure to use the mic while you have it. If Rogan is talking and DC has a great point, he'll likely lose the opportunity to say it as the fight moves on. If Cormier is breaking down a certain exchange and Rogan disagrees, we're losing time losing time that could be spent commentating on what's actually happening. One dip into UFC Fight Pass into some older matchups that featured a two-man booth will showcase actual commentary from those present. Whether they're breaking down technique or giving backstory on fighters, there is far more time to focus and allow the commentary to be well balanced and flow smoothly. So whether it's the overall giddiness of both Joe Rogan and DC, the lack of fans for atmosphere, or even the very existence of a three-man booth in the first place, perhaps even a combination of all three factors, it's just very clear to me that this is not working. It devalues what's actually happening inside the cage and the stakes that exist for the competitors. And I think the sport deserves better, in all honesty. I think Joe Rogan and Daniel Cormier are excellent commentators, but I just think having them together is a recipe for disaster. That said, Jon Anik is the king of sports commentary, and I'll fight any man who says otherwise. But what do you think of the UFC's commentary team of late? Do you agree that the three-man booth with this lineup is doomed to fail, no matter how strong the individuals themselves might be? Be sure to let us know in the comment section below. We always love to hear from you guys. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like before subscribing to the channel so you can stay up to date with all of our latest uploads. Thanks for watching.